All right, welcome back to another episode of the Drew Sutton Leadership Show. Hey, get ready to be inspired. Today we have Evan Doyle, a trailblazer who turned 18 years of pastoral ministry into a powerful platform for personal and spiritual growth. As the host of the In Between podcast on YouTube, Evan empowers mission-driven individuals to step boldly into the life they're discovering. His transformational insights have been spotlighted in Truity, Catalyst, ChurchLeader, and Christian Post. Whether through his writing, coaching, or deep dive conversation, Evan equips people to move from familiar to flourishing with clarity, confidence, and purpose. Let's welcome your guide to the next chapter, Evan Doyle. Evan, welcome to the show, man.
Drew, happy to be here. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, this is another one of those great, I talk on the show all the time about the importance of networking and reaching out and building new communities. Evan and I met at kind of a random meetup. We have a friend in common named Brian. We hit it off, and I was like, "Man, Evan, you got to come on the show."
Mm-hmm.
Now, Evan, you've been a pastor for 18 years, but then you've also been working at a startup recently.
Yeah.
Talk to me real quick about the difference between working in a church or in a ministry setting and working in a startup.
Honestly, there's differences, because there's a lot of similarities, but I would say differences. There's a lot less. There's a lot less. There's a lot less drama.
At the startup. The startup is less drama than the ministry.
Yeah, it's just, hey, let's work together. What skills do you bring to the table? And we got a lot of stuff we need to do. So let's try to elevate the skills that we need, make great decisions, and do great work, and accomplish as much as we can to keep the ball moving forward. So in my experience, there's been a lot less drama in the startup space.
A lot less drama in the startup space. But now you're not an expert in drama per se. You're an expert in transition and transformation. Let me pull up your bio again here so I can read the phrase that I love so much here. Writing the next chapter, I think is what it said. That's super exciting. The idea that we can be the guide to our own lives. But in America, and I run into this as well, I've had the opportunity to transition a couple of companies and a couple of careers. Talk to me. Why do people fear transition so much?
I think because there's a lot of unknowns. There's a lot of things that you just don't know when you're trying to figure out, what could be next, or even when things happen that you really were out of, they were out of your control. You didn't have much decision in the change, but it just kind of happened. There's a lot of things that are unknown. There's uncertainties. It's unfamiliar. You've lived a life, or you've served in a role, you've operated in a certain capacity, and that's what you know. And when that gets disrupted, there's a lot of things to figure out. And some of that is you're just not sure what it is, what it could be. And so it's the unknown.
Yeah. Now, one of the things that you said to me, and this is like the moment that I was like, oh, we're going to have Evan on the show, is that new work always starts with an interruption. So kind of describe to me that interruption. And then, so I think that we have an interruption and we get frustrated. What's the initial emotional response that you personally have? And then what have you tried to shift? Hey, this is how I normally deal with it. This is how I want to deal with it.
Yeah, I think, depending on the type of, if we're just talking about work, let's say, and the interruption could be disagreements, misalignment in values. You start to understand that, hey, maybe we have different vision. Maybe they see it one way and I see it another way. And instead of allowing those things to just drive you nuts and just be a constant source of frustration, or that person's wrong and I'm right, or vice versa, maybe it's just okay that you see things differently. And the fact that you do see maybe things so differently and so strongly, you both have very strong opinions. Maybe instead of it just being a constant source of frustration, maybe it can just be something that is okay and an opportunity to do new things, explore new things, and find new ways of operating and living. It doesn't have to. That's one thing that I love. Like it doesn't have to stay the same. Like we have power, and often we have more capacity and more skill sets than we give ourselves credit for to make those types of changes. And so maybe instead of it being a source of frustration, maybe it's an opportunity for freedom and change.
I like that. When I initially thought about transition, I was thinking about the more dramatic ones, like somebody gets laid off, somebody gets a promotion, doesn't get a promotion, gets a new boss, those big ones. But just perspective changes with your peers, where you're like having to make a compromise or negotiate an interaction. As an engineer, when I was doing engineering work, supply chain and engineering seemed like they were always kind of like butting heads,
Mhm.
and production and engineering were always kind of butting heads. And those can be major moments of transition where you're meeting a different perspective, and you're like, "Oh, I have to shift here." That's good, man. That's good.
Mhm.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, it's just, sometimes it's not as escalated as what we think it is. Sometimes it's just, that maybe that person thinks differently than I do. Maybe they're motivated by different things. Maybe we just have differences in how we communicate. And instead of it being that person's bad and I'm good or whatever it is, a lot of times it's not what we make it. If we can just begin to like bring it down to a human level, like, no, I think they just see things differently than I do, and that's okay.
Yeah. So, now, how do you help people with this? Like, you have 18 years of ministry. You're clearly skilled at the profession. I know that you've gone through a couple of transitions. You were in full-time ministry, then you joined this really cool startup. Um, so for you yourself, when did you know, hey, this is something I want to start talking about? Of I think I may have failed to mention this. If you're listening in right now, you can find Evan's podcast at it's theinbetween.com. It's theinbetween.com. He's also on YouTube and Spotify. The show is called The In Between. So if you're in the middle of a transition, you might want to go check out his podcast because he's going to help guide you through his 3-step process for managing, finding peace in that transition. So, sorry, back to you, Evan. When did you know, hey, I need to make this a podcast? This is something that people need. This is something people are going to want to listen to. For you, when was the moment you're like, yes, I need to make this happen?
Yeah, so I'll give a little context. I mean, it's definitely been a work in progress, but as you know, I've done a lot of work over the past couple years, just exploring, thinking, getting coaching, therapy, all types of things. And as I was looking back on different aspects of my life, even as a pastor over those 18 years, one of the roles, aside from just the job title, one of the functions that I served was primarily in a transitionary type bridge building capacity. So for example, if there was someone that had moved on from a position and there was absence or gap, a lot of times I would go in to fill that gap, rebuild, build connections, build relationships, get it to where it's healthy, bring in a new leader and move on. And that was something that I did in several different roles over the years, multiple times. And so as I began to understand that, and then looked at even my own transitions throughout my life, moved to California and back, um, had different jobs in between pastoring roles. And then in 2020, when I ultimately decided that I did want to move on from pastoring, made a big jump and went and worked essentially at a startup. Then I freelanced for about a year. And then I started working where I currently do at the startup that I'm at now. And so there's been a lot of transition in my life. And so as I was understanding that and exploring that, and also understanding some of the phases that help you navigate through those transitions, I began to understand that, maybe there is something that I can offer that could help others who are in the same place. And so as I just considered my own story and began to identify what some of those phases are in the path of transition, I kind of landed, I think these are conversations that people need to hear.
No, I think they definitely do. I think that America's in a time of transition. I think uh, COVID really shook up our culture way more than we even really appreciate these days.
Hmm.
It shook up our economy way more. I've um, because of my clients and then my kind of my social circles that I run in, there's a lot more uncertainty and fear than people are kind of letting trickle down to the lower levels. So transitions, I think it's a perfect message to be talking about right now. The other thing I think is, you go back to 1950, you go back to 1930, and there was humanity all of history up until about 1990. Humanity had a huge amount of uncertainty in it. And so growing up, learning to manage that uncertainty was just a natural part of the human experience. But today we've been taught, and as a manager at larger corporations, I used to sell this. If you just come in here and put on your golden handcuffs, I will give you a career path, which is a made up thing that I say, because I'll fire you whenever I need to. But I want you to be comfortable, and I want you to feel like you have this little lane that you can live in. And what I'm selling is lack of rocking the boat, lack of transition, safety, familiarity. And we all bought that lie. And as a result, I think we've hampered, and I think this is your phrasing I love. We want to move from familiarity to flourishing. Flourishing is what happens after you get a little bit uncomfortable. And if you talk to any of the high performers that you and I both talk to and work with, flourishing happens in that dynamic, uncertain, stable time. So, all right. So let's say that I realized, man, life's transitioning here. It's time. I need to make a change. Otherwise, I'm going to become stagnant. But I'm uncomfortable. How do I get emotionally good? How do you manage leaving familiar and learning to enjoy the flourishing moment?
Well, you've got to be willing to do a little deep dive. One of the things that I kind of equate it to, like I grew up water skiing, wakeboarding,
Oh yeah.
and to do that, you have to be moving pretty fast. Like
Ah,
you have to move fast, and a lot of people that do like to work, I find a lot of enjoyment in my work. I find a lot of enjoyment in wearing multiple hats, working hard, side hustles, all kinds of things. And for people that are high performers, you like to move quick and you like to get stuff done, but in order sometimes to move from the familiar to a new place of flourishing, you do have to slow down. And so when you start to slow down when you're water skiing or wakeboarding, you start to sink. And
yeah.
and that's okay in this path of transition, because you have to start looking at things that are a little bit below the surface. You've got to start exploring, hey, how did I get here? Why is this happening? Rather than doing, you have to start focusing on being. Like, who am I? Instead of all this doing, who do I want to be? What is this? Less about what am I going to do? Who am I going to become? And so you've got to slow down, and to slow down, you have to start asking some questions. You've got to start asking some why type questions. Why did I get here? And this could be from lots of different things. It could be from you've just carried this unsettledness inside of you. Perhaps there's been a change that's occurred, a disruption. Maybe there's been disagreements. These are all indicators of transition. And so to get to that place of flourishing, you first have to slow down and kind of enter this phase of asking why. And essentially you're just asking questions. You're trying to understand and pay attention to how you got to where you currently are. You know, why am I here? How did I get here? Who am I becoming in this process? You know, you could even be maybe there's woundedness that has occurred that you just can't even put your finger on, but you have to be able to identify this and understand this if you're going to move to flourishing.
Yeah, I'm gonna give you a bling bling there. That was, just say that one more time. In order to flourish, you have to slow down. Man, that's so good. So you're slowing down. Now, let me ask you, when you slow down, is this something, I mean, obviously you're going to have to spend a lot of time internally processing what's going on. I call it the whiteboard of your mind. Like, what I tell my kids all the time is, your emotions just go up to the whiteboard and they just write stuff down on the whiteboard all the time. And not all of that stuff is useful, right? Some, like, it's like a chat GPT agents just run amok, and it's just like writing down whatever you feel at the moment. And a lot of times we think that what's written on the whiteboard is us. No, it's just our emotions saying, hey, this is how I feel. And then we have to say, oh, this is, like, for instance, anger. I remember I'd become I guess a third level manager. Like, I had leaders underneath me. Right. And I was full of anger that was just like simmering. I kept stuffing it. And so I had to go through the process of recognizing that anger. And that's when I realized, wait a minute, this anger is not who I am. It's an emotion that's indicating I need to think about something. Now I need to get really clear on what's causing the anger, clear on the appropriate response to the anger, clear on the timing for that. Right. So it was a big moment for me. So I tell my kids, listen, just because you feel a certain way doesn't mean you are a certain way. It just means you feel that way. Sure. And now you need to process that. The problem is, that is you talk about finding your why. Is that something people can do on their own? And if they can do it on their own, what's some tips? And if they can't do it on their own, what are your suggestions on finding a good coach?
Sure. So yes, you can do it on your own. If you're willing to do a little bit of exploring. So, like, how willing are you to, like, spend time, even if it's like 5, 10, 15 minutes in the morning, you set aside some time to just start, even if you start it with that question, how did I get here? Just start with that question. How did I get here? And journal 5, 10, 15 minutes. You'd be surprised what comes out. Another way that you could begin to explore some of this is, what do I value? Now, that sounds like it could be like a really big, deep, philosophical question. I bet you could come up with your list of 5 things that you value in 10 minutes if you just started jotting them down. So those types of exercises could be very helpful. As far as finding a coach, the way that I went about it, and this probably isn't the only way, but I wanted to understand a bit about the frameworks that they were going to use. And I wanted to make sure that some of our values aligned. If I'm going to get coaching, I want it to be in the direction or in alignment with things that I consider important or value. So that would be one way that I would assess, is this coaching that I want to receive? Are there frameworks and values, things that I value as well? So those are a couple tips there.
Yeah, no, I like those. I love that you bring up journaling. I think again, I come from an analytical background. I come from an action-oriented background. And I think sometimes we think that journaling is maybe a soft skill, or maybe like a namby-pamby thing, or meditating is, oh, well, I don't want to be weird, I don't want to meditate. But no, really, your brain is such an amazing gift. And it can parse out really what you value and what you prioritize, if you will take the time to move out the other clutter and then focus and just give it some time. I was actually, this morning, for instance, I was stuck on a problem. And so I set aside 20 minutes and I said, all right, I'm not going to think. I'm going to state the problem clearly. And then I'm going to let my brain spin on it for a little bit. And then stuff starts to percolate to the top. Some names, folks I could call about the problem percolated to the top. I was like, oh, now I have clarity. Now I can move forward. And then you say, and this is what another thing I love. I'm a pretty high speed driven type of a person. So I jump to this step a lot faster than I think others do. But you said you got to get to what if. So the first step is recognize that you have an interruption, recognize you're in a moment of transition. There's emotions that swirl there. Slow it down, get some clarity. And then you got to ask yourself, what if? So reframe the transition. So talk to me about what are some of your favorite results of this? Over to you.
Sure. So to get to being able to ask what if, you've got to ask those questions. And as you're asking those questions and processing, you are putting yourself in a place where you're able to make peace with where you are and with your past. And so as you make peace, and really, like you said, you're processing, even though things may still be a little unclear about what's next, you're okay. And really that's huge. You've got to get to a place where you're okay, where you're able to make peace with whatever the disruption, interruption has been. Because as you get settled in that place of peace, it positions you to abandon things that maybe you've held on to that have actually limited you.
Yeah.
Maybe it's things like identity, titles. For me, it was things like leadership, title, control, feeling important. I just holding on to those types of things that just I weighted more heavily than they really needed to be. And as I let go of some of those things, it opened me up to begin asking new types of questions. So instead of now having to ask why, I'm actually now able to begin asking, well, what if? What if? Even
Switching
if you've
from why to what if, man, that's so powerful.
even if you've experienced loss, like there's all kinds of transitions that can happen, and there's varying degrees of heartache and pain and all types of things that can happen in transition. But you can get to a place where you're asking what if, and this is where there are things that have been planted in you. There are skill sets that you have acquired along the way that you just may not have clearly seen yet. And so you're beginning to become aware of these things. Your outer life, you really what you want to start doing is you want to start aligning your outer life with words and language. There's something that you're beginning to see in your heart and mind, vision. There's things that you're seeing, and you want to begin aligning your outer life with the words and language as you're processing these things that you've all.
I love that, man. You want to start aligning your inner life and your outer life with words that are clear. That is so good.
There are things that you've already decided in your heart. You just haven't actually began to put the words or the action to move towards that. And so that's one of the things you're doing in this process.
Man, so for me, there's there's two spots that are like floating in my brain right now. I decided who I was going to be and how I was going to tolerate being treated, right? You meet different people. You and I, we meet high octane people at the C-suite executive level, or athletes, people that are really, a lot of times high octane people can be a little bit on the narcissistic sociopathic side of things, right? And I was meeting with one person within the last week, and he kind of pulled up one of these power moves on me, and I was like, no, I don't need to be treated that way. I'm gonna respect myself enough, because one of my values is I'm a high octane person. I'm a person of value. I grew up with a couple of bullies in my life, and kind of, small town America, you learn how to deal with that. And so I was like, oh, I'll take on this persona of the engineer, the smart kid, the dork kind of a thing. And I was like, no, I don't have to put up with that anymore. And that means if I don't want to work with this individual, that means that line of revenue, I'm giving up that line of revenue. But you know what? There are plenty of people out there who value what I bring, and I bring a huge amount of value to the table, and I don't have to tolerate being treated that way.
Mm.
A similar one as a leader, I had a couple of leaders earlier in my life that were very strong-armed, very kind of I grew up again, small town America. So there's kind of this, like, if somebody's made a lot of money, or if they have a lot of, social clout in the organization, they can get away with not abusive stuff, but just like strong arm tactics. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
So I began as a leader. I was like, well, I know how to handle this situation, because I went back to my Rolodex of leadership skills, and I was like, oh, here's the 2 that I have. And I was like, and so I would use those, and they would damage relationships. And I was like, you know what? That's not who I want to be as a leader. I can be a different person. And that's the reason I do the John Maxwell stuff, is I love John Maxwell's approach to leadership. Yeah, you gotta say, this is who I'm gonna be. My internal world and values is how I'm going to get with my external world and values.
Mm.
And that's going to cost me something sometimes,
Mhm.
but it's not actually going to cost me anything, because my internal world is now aligned with my external world.
Mhm.
And
You're
getting
actually
comfortable,
you're actually gaining,
you're gaining.
and it's fantastic. It's amazing.
Yeah.
So yeah, it there is loss, but there is gain to come as well.
Yeah. Well, awesome, man. All right. So you get to a what if, but that's not the end,
Mhm.
right? Slowing down, getting comfortable, starting to ask what if. Now you're opening up the next chapter of your life in
Mhm.
which you're the main character. My kids are teenagers right now, and they would say, man, he gives main character, which means
Mhm.
he gives off the energy of the main character.
Mhm.
So now you're at a spot where you've asked what if, and you can now step into that really cool main character stage where you're flourishing.
Mhm.
Talk to me about that transition. Talk to me about it in your own life.
Yeah, so an aspect of flourishing is that you're not just identifying you are identifying what is important to you, what you value, uh, but you're also uncovering and beginning to understand that there are things that have been developed in you that others will benefit from too. And so really
Mm,
a high a high part of flourishing is when you are able to serve and to give and realize the things that have been put in you, the things that have been built in you, the things that you've been developing along the way. Yes, there is great joy and fulfillment and flourishing that you get to experience as you begin to walk in and exercise and use those types of skill sets and gifts that have been nurtured. But the vision has to be beyond just, well, this is what can I do for me? There's things that have been built and developed in you that others are going to benefit from as well. So for
I'm going to
me,
jump in there real
that's
quick.
what flourishing looks like.
Let me jump in there real quick and just, I think this is, I don't think we talked about this, but I think this is the core nugget that I think caused me to say, yes, we connect this. I want to be with Evan. This is amazing. Is I deeply believe that we were all put on this earth with a spark that the rest of us need.
Mm,
And when we don't release that spark, when we don't learn, surround it in a little tinder bundle, turn it into a fire, put it on a stick, when we don't share that light with the rest of the world, the stuff that little spark that's just ours, the rest of us suffer. And that's why I do leadership, is because I deeply believe each one of you, everybody, has something that's supposed to bless me. Not like like I have something that's supposed to bless you, and you have something that's supposed to bless me. And if I don't help you,
mm,
then the world is a darker place because of it.
mhm,
Um,
mm,
so yeah, I mean, man, I've never thought of that phrase. Flourishing is really about you blessing other people. It's not,
mm,
because we talk about flourishing in this like kind of narcissistic, oh, I want to feel good. No, flourishing happens when you start really blessing others. That's a really cool idea.
mhm. Yeah, 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 for sure. So, just a couple quick things, like if you're stuck or wondering, or like, how do I process? Just here's a couple questions for you. Like, listen to yourself describe what your future could look like, and what do you hear yourself saying? I was really afraid to describe and articulate what some of that could be.
Yes.
There's this aspect of fear of actually write it down on paper. If maybe share it with your spouse, a close friend, listen to yourself describe what your future could look like, and then really grab hold of what you hear yourself saying. There could be very shocking, exciting things that begin to flow when you take that opportunity
And I might
to
even
do
amp
that.
it up a little bit and say, if you're not afraid, I did this. It was a bunch of guys. We were good friends. We were kind of, it was like late night. The kids were with the women. It was just the guys, right? And I asked the guys this question. I was like, what is the one thing you're calling that you're afraid to tell anybody? And
Yes.
that was one of the most rich conversations I've ever had. So if you're not afraid of the thing that you're writing down, it's because it's not touching your heart. Man,
Yes.
that's
It's a
such a
very
rich
vulnerable, it's vulnerable,
yeah.
but that's okay.
Yeah. And it's like that's flourishing is when you get
Yes.
to step into the thing that you're afraid to tell anybody about, man. That's exciting. So you talk about this. This is the type of stuff you talk about on your podcast. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, for
And
sure.
you're starting a community here soon.
Yes.
So a
Yep.
place that's a safe place where folks that are like, I know I'm called to more. I know that I'm in transition, a place where they can like navigate that path, find the peace in transition, find their what if, then really start living into their flourishing. How can people get a hold of you so that they can find out more about this?
No, I appreciate that, Drew. Go to itstheinbetween.com. There's a free guide there for you to help you identify your first and next step, regardless of what part of the path you're on. You're going to get some help in discovering your next step. So go to itstheinbetween.com. There's a free guide there for you. But then if you want to check out the podcast, it's available on Spotify and YouTube. And so there's links there as well that'll take you directly to the episodes.
Yeah. And if you're you're on LinkedIn here, you're on Facebook, you're watching the show, in the comments, we're going to put a link to these things so that you can go directly to it. But reach out to Evan. What type of folks do you think would really benefit from this the most?
So if you've served in like a purpose-driven role in a mission-focused organization, so that could be a nonprofit, that could be a church, that could be any of those types of roles where there's been a high level of mission within the organization, and you personally are an individual that wants your work to be meaningful. You place a high value on it, on it being meaningful, making an impact. If you're that type of person, these types of conversations are probably going to be encouraging to you.
Yeah. And as I'm listening to you and as we've known each other, also, if you're a business owner, right? And if you're a purpose-driven business owner, specifically maybe a startup or, a small business owner that says, no, we live with a passion here. We live with a purpose. And you're looking for that person that's super experienced. Remember, Evan not only is doing this podcast, he has 18 years of ministry experience. He really knows and is certified and qualified to handle the souls of your people and to help everyone in your organization find a spot of flourishing, everyone in your organization to manage the transitions that happen, the tensions that rise up. Reach out to Evan. We are running out of time on the show and breaking my heart here, but they say leave the audience wanting more. Reach out to Evan, tell him you heard him on the Drew Sutton Leadership Show. Go get your guide, plug into the podcast, and start getting excited about finding peace and flourishing past transition. All right, that's enough for me. Evan, you have any closing thoughts? I'll give the floor over to you.
No, Drew, this has been fantastic. I appreciate you so much. And yes, wherever you are, wherever you're at, I believe that there's always more, and you've got more potential than maybe you're giving yourself credit for. Start to lean into that and see where that takes you.
Awesome. All right, with that, we are out.